in this topic, and a number of you showing up today on the session. Today we are going to start off with our topic, the XSLT. Later on we'll talk about some of the survey results, some of the things you filled in when you signed up for this webinar today. And finally, just review our webinar schedule for other WebWorks webinars. So we last covered this topic actually in January of this year, January 2012, and at that time part of our survey included a request for a snapshot of what people knew about. What we saw here was that a number of people were starting out with XML and XSL. From the level of questions I'm getting back from folks, it seems that people are still around in this area. Some of you have moved forward. Okay, Mike has experience. Yes. Carrie Young starting out. Okay, number of folks starting out. All right, great. What's good and interesting about this is a number of folks are finding ways to get success customizing ePublisher formats. Some of you may be doing that with CSS changes. You may be doing that with page template changes. And those are all great places to get started and sometimes can get you where you need to go. Obviously, the XSLT gets into heavier duty customization, something more complex. Well, today, the session when you signed up, this was the question. I wanted to find out what your goals were. And we had this, trying to understand if XSLT was the right choice, learning how to use it, customizing ePublisher, and then incorporating existing XSLT code. What this question tells me is, again, huge focus. The reason people are learning this at all is so they can make customizations to their ePublisher formats, but there's still this learning curve of how do we actually use XSLT for processing data. And what we're going to go over today is start off with just that pristine, how do we use XML for data processing, or XSLT for data processing. And then we will, toward the end, branch toward things. But I feel like even if we have to do this as two sections or two segments, that's fine. We just want to make sure that you do have these basics down and under your belt. So we didn't just have you click a couple of buttons and say, hey, what level you're at or what are you trying to focus on. We actually asked you, what are your goals for this session? And here's what we got back. And I've organized the answers, the responses, to try and give you an idea of just the range that we're looking at. This first part, as you can see, some folks are beginning. They want to have background on it, and they're asking standard questions like, can XSLT do this? In this case, can it write to a text file? The answer is, of course, yes, it can. So these are some of the things we will start off with and cover today. Now, the next part starts to be questions specific to ePublisher. One of these is just generic. Why is it? What's the logic of the www namespaces? We'll talk about namespaces. And then there's some specific questions about processing orders. Time-wise, we won't be able to fit this in today. I will point out, though, that we did cover this topic in the October 2012 Power Hour. And I'd recommend, if you haven't seen that, you go take a look in the Power Hour archive, and you can watch a recording of that session. That won't answer all your questions, but it will certainly get you started toward this. We'll also make sure to put some of these topics, if we see some of these come up, we'll try to put those in as potential future topics for Power Hour sessions. Continuing on, still questions. These seem to be focused on how can you do customizations to ePublisher templates, any way to customize the output, and a specific question on reverb customizations. Here I will also point out you can go to the Power Archive for both August and September of this year. In those sections we talked on specifically customizing reverb, and the other session on that was doing customizations with page templates. So between the CSS changes and page templates and specific reverb knowledge, there's actually quite a bit that you can do that does not strictly involve XSLT to make it happen. Another person was asking about documentation on a variety of our tags and schemas and things that we use. We'll actually touch on these briefly today. I would recommend, if you want to learn more about these, many of these are documented on the WebWorks Wiki under our Dev Center under documentation, especially all of the extension namespaces. Then there were some very specific questions here about using some advanced techniques in ePublisher. I think they were probably beyond the scope of what we can cover here today, since we are starting with basics of XSLT. I did want to point whoever has this, though, to go and take a look over in Study Hall and drop by there. Study Hall is a session. We run that twice a month, and that's a bring your projects, and we're happy to help work on, give you ideas and possible ways to move forward to make that work. And it's a great way to explore and learn more about ePublisher. Based on the feedback of what you filled in and the type of questions being answered, we're going to focus really on the core of XML and XSLT today. We will get into some ePublisher. Again, though, our main focus will be really foundationally understanding how XML and XSLT work. To help us toward this, there are a couple of tools we'll use. One is the WebWorks Toys server. You may have seen this before back in January. The service is still up and running. You're welcome to go and use it. What this service does is it allows you to play around with XSLT in your browser window. So you don't need an editor or anything else. You can just go in and go to toys.webworks.com and create an XSL editing session and go from there. Of course, there's a text editor is good. If you have an XML or XSLT editor, that's great. And then, of course, ePublisher Designer to really let us play around with what we can do with XSL in ePublisher itself. So let's go nuts and bolts here. And I will warn you, I'm expecting lots of questions if something doesn't make sense. If we go forward and we leave somebody behind, it won't get better. Let's make sure we understand everything. So XML, what is it? I think most folks are fairly familiar with XML, and really it's very simple when you start off. It's just a standard syntax for representing any type of structured data. That's what it is at its heart. The components of it are basically there's an XML declaration, or declaration as I've written it here, usually an XML declaration. It's followed by then it contains elements, which are just a name with brackets around it, and then attributes. And attributes are additional items that can be tagged onto an element and given various values. So the sample XML document is pretty simple. You can come in and have it just states that it has XML. Will likely state the version. These are just version 1.0. The encoding type is UTF-8. You can use various encodings. This is one of the nice parts of XML. All the nightmare problems associated with parsing and encoding are handled and addressed by XML as part of the standard. We take it for granted, but this is really a big deal if you come from, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago when encodings were one of the big problems in any kind of text processing. For XML, it's taken care of for you. The other part is, again, you're just seeing here a document element, a content element, and then we've got some examples of paragraphs with an ID attribute and a style name attribute. And this is, again, just a very simple XML file. Okay? All right. Okay. I'm asking a question in the chat. If y'all can tell me, I'll just keep moving along. If anybody has any questions, just raise a flag. Okay. The next thing when we talk about XML, when XML first came out, it really just had what we described. This idea of it covered encoding. It says here's a simplified markup for creating any kind of data structure you'd like and representing it. Later on, they added in this recommendation for namespaces. And namespaces are actually a really big deal. And the way ePublisher uses them and the way XSLT uses them, you have to pretty much have namespaces. So you want to think of using the XML 1.0 spec plus namespaces together. That's really how we think of XML these days. Okay. And what an XML namespace is simply a way to identify elements. And we're going to basically, you can basically think of it as if you're doing, say, for example, context-sensitive help. You might have, if you're familiar with our products for WebWorks Help or Reverb, WebWorks Reverb, when you specify a topic, in addition to that topic, you have to give us a context so we understand, okay, where are we looking for this topic? If you were using HTML help, for example, you might give us a topic ID. That's great. We don't know where to resolve that topic ID unless you tell us which chum file to go and look in. So that chum file location becomes a context, and then we can use that topic and understand and find what you're looking for. So that would be in the case of context-sensitive help. XML namespaces work in a similar way. If you gave us a tag and said, here's a header tag, that doesn't really mean anything. You know that it's an element, you know that it's a header element, but what are you supposed to know about it? Well, you have to go and find, well, what namespace is it declared in? If it's declared in, say, an HTML namespace, you might realize, oh, this is HTML5, and maybe this is supposed to be a header or footer element, or maybe this is the head section of a HTML file. If you give me another context, like say a data context, then you understand, oh, okay, that's what that particular element refers to. Okay? So namespaces let us tie an element to a particular location. All right. Now, you'll also see that there's generally two types of namespaces. There's one that uses a URL and another that's called a URN. The major difference between those is URNs are really just names. And one advantage is that they won't necessarily try to be resolved when you process them. If you look at WebWorks ePublisher under the hood, we use lots of URNs because we really don't want things to be resolved to any particular location. A lot of times we may be using these URNs to simply identify, to give ourselves a unique document type, not that we are, so that we can refer to those elements. It's not necessarily the case that we're strictly trying to enforce a particular schema. We're just trying to refer to items that came out of a particular file or from a particular place with a particular name. Okay? Okay. So let's take a look at this. All right, so again, what do these namespaces let you do? What happens is that when you go into an XML document, you can create a namespace declaration. And that means you can mix two types of XML tags or more. All right? So for example here, let's say there's a choose element that was valid both in HTML and in XSL namespace. If I just wrote the choose element, when you look at it, you won't know, well, what is it referring to? What does it mean? It could fit for either one. So in this way, an XML namespace lets you explicitly state which version of the choose element you're using at that time. Okay? So let me give you an example here. Here's a document that uses, here's an XML document that uses namespaces. You can see at the top there it has two namespace declarations, one for www.doc and one for HTML. All right? This piece right here creates an HTML declaration, a namespace declaration for HTML. And then that allows us to embed HTML-based content within this XML document so we can identify those two. Okay. Let's see. Looks like Melissa had a question. Okay. Okay. No worries. All right. Okay, I'm asking the question if XML namespaces make sense to everyone. Jesse, another example I like is the difference between HTML:p and data:p. Both elements are named p, but the namespace prefix qualifies which p we were talking about. That's absolutely correct, Jesse. That's a great example. I perhaps should have used that one instead. Okay, Nadine's good on namespaces. That's great. Okay. And your silence indicates that you're good to go. Yes? Okay, great.
The conference is now in question and answer mode.
Okay, just making sure we have everything muted for now. You can certainly join me at any time, but trying to keep the noise down for the recording. All right, so let's move on to XSLT. So first of all, XSLT, it's a programming language for transforming XML files. That's actually what it stands for, is Extensible Style Language Transformations. Okay. The other caveat on it is that it's a programming language that is itself written in XML. That's both good and bad, or good and confusing. Here's why. Here's an XSL style sheet. You'll note that namespaces are really important here. And what we do is we declare a namespace, in this case for XSL, and then we can use that to identify XSL programming elements. Okay? And so what you're seeing here is we get this ability to, we're using this capability with namespaces to mix all these different elements in the same area. We can mix them up and do great things with them to actually work with transforming XML content. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of XSLT right now. What I mostly want you to just understand is it is XML-based, and it relies on namespaces so that it can blend and work with these other XML formats. Okay. All right. Another component that's part of XSLT is XPath. And XPath is a query language. And it's pretty neat because what it lets you do is you can think of it as a souped-up version of regular expressions, but specifically for XML files. So normally where you might have a text file and use regular expressions to peel data out of it or do other processing, XPath is focused on giving you the ability to query an XML document. Okay? And the nice part is that this generic capability forms the basis of your XSLT processing. So when we talk about XSLT, we'll also talk about XPath as being a closely related technology. Now there are cases where you can use XPath outside of XSLT, so it can come up even on its own in other contexts. But when you know it, you can also use it within XSLT. Okay, so here would be an example of using XPath. Our goal here is that we have an XML document. It has two namespaces. This is a copy of the document we saw earlier. This has the embedded namespace for HTML and also www.doc. And what we'd like to do, our goal is to select that www.doc text element. Okay, we want to get its value. All right? That's what we're trying to get. There's several ways that you can go about this with XPath. Okay? Some of the things that you'll see in XPath that are important. First of all, on the left side, you'll see you can do basically a path hierarchy. You can say things like, hey, start at the root of the document and then search anywhere underneath the document. There's a specialized context for this. In this case, we're saying // It says, search for this anywhere in the document. I don't care where it is. And hey, while you're doing this, I want you to find an element, named text, who's in the www.doc namespace. You find me one of those, and then can you please give me back its value attribute? All right? So if I were to query for this, this would respond with that text in a paragraph. Okay? This is one way to run that XPath query. XPath gives you more ways to qualify this, though. And as you learn more about XPath, you start to see it's very rich in its query capabilities. Here's an example of a more complex thing that will give you the same result. Okay. In this case, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, start at the root of the document, then look anywhere underneath it and find me a paragraph element in the www.namespace. Okay. Find the one whose ID, we're going to qualify this element. We don't want any paragraph. We want the element whose ID is 1. All right? So we'll find that guy. And then we'll say, okay, look underneath him. Look underneath the first text run, and then go get that text element and give us the value out of that. All right? A couple of questions coming up. So Tim has a question. How does it respond? Is value returned as a string or as a variable? Good question. XSLT/XPath will return a string in this case. Okay? So XSLT returns basically node sets, tree fragments, and strings. And, well, actually, simple types like numbers and strings. Okay? There are ways to convert things. If you need to explicitly convert something to a number or to convert it to a Boolean, there are ways to do that within the language. But usually you can deal with those as and when you need them. The key thing to keep in mind is, again, most of these responses will be returning to you. It depends on what you ask for. In this case, we asked for an attribute. That attribute stores a string. Then it will return a string. If we had gotten rid of that and we returned it, it would have returned to us that text element. And we could do additional processing on it. Okay? Okay, good. See, y'all are blowing through this. You're already through XPath and XSLT. This is great. All right. Okay. Conceptually, yes. I like that qualifier, Nadine. Now let's talk about XSLT Output. Won't go too much into the details here, but here's the main things you need to know. By default, XSLT 1.0 supports one default input and one output. Okay? So you can think of it as taking, and that's based on its name, a transformation language. You take in an XML file, you transform it to a new form. Okay? ePublisher does have some extensions to XSLT 1.0. There are other ways to do this, but for XSLT 1.0, ePublisher does extend that, and we allow you to output multiple files, and we let you put out different types. Most XSLT processors can output XML, HTML, and text. ePublisher also gives you the ability to output XHTML. It's a small but significant difference between XHTML and straight XML. Okay. And Tim has a question. Does this translate to one stationary to many output formats? Tim, not exactly. It means one XSL style sheet can output multiple files. Okay. Output formats require more work, etc. So you can write a text log at the same time generating HTML. Yes, that's true. You can do that. Okay. All right, so a couple of tips just that I'm going to talk on XSLT and what we're going to try and cover today. Most cases, when you look at XSLT examples that you're going to see out there on the web, they're going to be very straightforward. They're going to take in one document, they're going to process it through and get one output. And that's great. But I will tell you, that is not the real world. The real world is that you need to usually pull data from another source, and you need to combine it with something that you're working on. You have to be able to look at two data sources at a time, okay? And this is obviously what ePublisher supports and what we do all day. The trick is that to make the jump from simple transforms to something that's more complex, where you're pulling data from another source, when you can get comfortable with that, that's when you're going to really be able to have success, not just with ePublisher, but with any kind of XML processing with XSLT. Okay? Okay. There are a couple of tips and things for you to keep in your mind as you go through this. These are lessons we've learned over the 6, 7+ years we've been working with ePublisher. First of all, very key, don't try to do too much in one step. You want to create XSL transforms that perform a single clear operation. If you get too complex or things get too over the top, it can get squirrely for you. And it's difficult to understand in the process. The other reason is that another lesson we've learned is that sometimes it's cheaper and easier to process data multiple times. This can be done fairly quickly in most cases with XSLT. The reason you'll do that is if you try to figure out an answer that you need, like, hey, you get to a point and you say, oh, I need this answer. If you're in XSLT or if you're in a procedural language, a lot of times what people will do is they get to that point, they then write code to say, okay, go find that answer for me. In XSLT, it's better to kind of have everything baked in advance. If you need an answer, don't try to do it in that transform. Move it to an earlier stage. Have an earlier stage go and process the data and find the answer for you. That way, when you're processing, you just look it up and say, oh, yeah, that's what I need. Thank you very much. Okay. ePublisher uses this technique for a variety of things, like drop-downs, for pop-ups. Those behaviors, there's a lot of things to consider as to when they're valid, when the open-close behaviors are correct. And it's pretty much impossible to write that efficiently, get the answer correct, while you're outputting content. So what you do is you pre-calc it, and then you just load that data file and look it up while you're running through the content. Okay. The other lesson we've learned is that it's usually better sometimes, too, if you can combine files into one to ensure clear code. So if you have some data you're consulting on the left and you're combining with data over in another file, there's some complexity to do that. Sometimes you may want to just take a pass, combine those two data points, and then run forward. Now, these tips, what's key about them is that they won't always be your best choice in terms of performance up front, but they will help you get the correct answer out of your XSL and get you successful with those XML transforms. Then you can go back once that's working and take a look and say, well, maybe I'll do this way, or I'll do this another way to try and improve speed or something else, do some other trade-offs. Okay? Okay. Question. XPath have recursive looping for multiple processing. Let me see if I can get this correct. Okay, there are... So XPath is a simple query language. No recursion. Okay, XSLT does support recursion, but there are limits, so be careful. Okay. So ePublisher allows you to string together multiple XSL transforms, which can often be faster and clearer. it depends on the task. Okay. All right. I'll also point something out. We try to follow these rules, but there's another piece you need to know. We discovered these rules over the 6-7 years we've been working on ePublisher. And there are certain areas that we know violate these rules. What are some of those? How about anybody who's knocked around in Content XSL? There's some things we could do to make Content XSL a lot clearer and a lot cleaner for people to work on it. Content XSL is doing one of the things I was telling you is somewhat difficult. It's actually looking in a lot of different places to try and find answers. Content XSL looks at the form of your document that it's processing. It looks to a behaviors definition. It looks to a database of links. It looks to a version of your project. It also constructs on the fly current attributes and other formatting attributes that it's inheriting. All kinds of crazy stuff's going on through there. So while all that work is necessary, one of the lessons is it may not be required to do it all at one time, at the same time. Instead of doing all 4 or 5 of those things, it's possible, take a pass, do one of them. Take another pass, do the second part, things like that. Some of those changes we have been able to apply to newer formats, such as our PDF XSLFO. That one works a little differently, and some aspects of it are easier to work with because of it. We've been hesitant to make wide-scale changes to Content XSL based on the fact that folks may have significant customizations, and that could make it more complex for them to migrate them. But it's a balance between those two. We'd like to make it easier for people to get in there to do the customizations, but the existing customizations we don't want to completely break for them going forward. So if you do want to see more easier customization, you can also let us know if, hey, I'd trade a simpler version of all that if I could understand it better. Okay? Okay. So now it's time. We're going to jump out of slide decks and go run off somewhere else. Before we leave, though, here's a list of resources. We'll come back to these. You have a link to the WebWorks Toys server. There's also some information on XML namespaces and understanding them. A couple of quick reference guides. One is the quick reference guide for XPath and XSLT. That one's handy. We use that pretty regularly. And then the last two are links to earlier power sessions on XSLT. So if you want to look back on those, this may be helpful. Okay. So let me one more time here. Okay. Any questions before we jump into the code? All right. All right. Carrie's ready to go. All right. So here's what we're going to do. I'm actually going to give you a way to play around with these transforms. You can go and create your own session. We can go over to toys.webworks.com, and this is a little server. It runs here at WebWorks, and what it does is, well, you'll see here. If you're doing this right now, you can, and it will create a new session. And each one of these sessions has its own identifier up here. Okay. And what I'm going to do is bookmark it so I don't lose it. Okay. And I'm going to paste it in over here. Okay. If you guys want to click on that link, you'll actually be able to see this code, not just here in the session, but you'll actually be able to see it on your browser. Okay. This should work in, I last tested this in Firefox. I'm running this in Firefox. I need to double check to see if it's running in Chrome and the others. I haven't double checked that, so actually don't hold me to that. It should work in IE and in Firefox, but I'll need to double check. It does work in Chrome. Yay, Tracy. All right, good. Okay, so what do we got here? What we have is a couple of edit regions. We've got, first of all, an XML input area. You can put anything you want in here. Okay. Next, we have an XSL style sheet. So we're going to be playing around with things. And then we've got some simple output. We've got our output is HTML and our output is text. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at what we got. What I have here, starting off, is just a simple XML document. We're going to change this as we go forward. I will tell you that this is based on the WebWorks Intermediate format. This is what ePublisher spends a lot of its day processing. What we do is we take your DITA content, we take your Word doc content, we take your frame content, and we transform it into an XML file that looks like this one. Okay? This one has IDs on your paragraphs, IDs on your text runs. It has links and style information, all that good fun stuff. Okay? If you ever wonder what's in your data folder, there's one of these sitting down there. All right? So knowing how to process these gives you the ability to start customizing ePublisher if you like. But it's also a decent starting point for just standard XSLT. Okay. Now let's look at a style sheet. So here's a simple style sheet declaration. And this is pretty typical. This isn't too bad. It looks kind of like a lot of stuff going on here, but it's not too bad if we'll go through it, and it should start to make more sense to you. So the first thing you see, hey, it's an XML document. We know that XSLT is an XML document. We have a style sheet as the XSL namespace or prefix on it. Perfect. We know that that's XSL because it says so right there on our namespace declaration. Wow, this is all looking good. So let's see. We've got the following namespace declaration. The default namespace declaration for this style sheet is XHTML. We also have that same one as :HTML. Okay, what that means is we can either write HTML:(H2), or we can just write H2. Okay. Now there's that's what it allows us to do. We've got there's for XSLT. We also have one for this www.doc. Okay, www.doc refers to our WebWorks document schema. That's here in our input document. Okay, so that's the document we're starting off with. We want to be able to reference these items. Okay. Okay. So we've got that, and then we have this thing. This is exclude result prefixes. What this says is we're saying, hey, when you dump this out, we really don't want to keep the HTML, XSL, and www.doc namespaces. We don't want those in our output because we're not going to use them. Please just get rid of them. Okay. The cleanup thing. Not a huge deal through there, but usually you can use that exclude result prefixes to clean things up. Okay. Now we've got a couple items here. We've got an output method. In ePublisher, ePublisher uses a little different way to output to give you a way to generate some multiple documents, but it effectively works identical to this output statement, or this output element. This output element lets you specify a method, it lets you specify a version and encoding, whether or not things are indented, all that good fun stuff. Okay. We can actually come here, if I want to change this to text, I can do that, and suddenly we'll start getting text dumped out. If I change it back to HTML, excuse me, then we'll start getting HTML dumped out. All right. The thing you should know about this, there's one which you can use in ePublisher, but browsers will sometimes, oh look, okay, this used to not work in browsers. This used to not work in browsers. Looks like it is working now. Your browser may not allow it. If it doesn't, that's okay. Just go in here and you can change it back to HTML. I don't know why they ever had a restriction on it, but they did for a while. Okay. Now, if you note what's happening here, is as I type and pause for a moment, it's going ahead and running these transforms so that you're able to just play around with the content. Now, forgive me, I do have to scroll back up and down to see what's going on here. But this gives you a quick way to mess with this. If you have a larger monitor too, longer monitor, that may help as well. Okay, let's see. We've got our style sheet declaration. We've got our namespaces all in there, which is for XSLT and for all the stuff we want to output and all the stuff that's being input. We've got our output declaration, which says how we're going to format what we're dumping out. A couple items here. These are instructions to the style sheet. One is a namespace alias. It says, look, there's a default namespace here. We're telling it that, you know what, HTML is the same thing as that, so if we use one or the other, it doesn't really matter. They're all the same namespace. Okay. Normally in ePublisher, you would see things like HTML:. For some reason, the browser is not accepting that. It's keeping this HTML: there. It should not. So what I'm just temporarily turning that off so we can get rid of that render artifact. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is good. We're down to here, and now we just have these little template matchy things left to go. Okay. I'll check. So good so far. All right. Okay. Good deal. Okay, so let's start talking about match templates. The way XSL primarily works is with a match template on an XPath expression. Now, I could type any XPath expression I want here. So, for example, we talked about earlier, let's say we wanted to match all these text elements. Okay? I can go ahead and do that. I can say, hey, match me all the www text elements. Okay? And what I want you to do is dump out their value attribute. Just dump out their value attribute. Okay? Now let's take a look at what this did. The XPath expression started at the beginning of the root of this document, and it said, hey, find a text element anywhere in it and get that value. So the way we refer to these is with this @value. Now we can there's a couple of things that we can know about. Create a variable. There's a little bit of voodoo magic going on with XSL. One is that whenever there's a match expression, whatever element we've matched, or whatever it is that we've matched, can be referenced by this dot. Basically, hey, this is where I'm at. Okay. What you'll see a lot of times in the XSLs that ePublisher uses is we'll go ahead and store that into a variable. The reason we do that is because there's times when we need to refer back to it, because it can change. It's an automatic assignment, and there's various ways it can change. And sometimes we want that, sometimes we don't. Okay. But what's great about that is that we can then use that to refer to a thing. Okay. And it's as if we were working directly with that element. So in this case, we've got this element, and we're referring to it there with that var text. Okay. To get an attribute, to tell the difference between, for example, let's say we change this and we want this to a text run. I might change my XPath to say, hey, give me a text item and give me a value underneath that text run. Okay, you can do that, but that's why they introduce this @ symbol, because it allows you to specify that allows you to distinguish those qualities. Okay. Okay. So let's go over, I think you're seeing a little bit here on how this XPath can be used. Let's actually talk to you about the defaults. Now what I'm going to do here is simply write out what you would call, what we call a, what's the right term? XSLT copy template. Okay? So if I have an XSL transform and I want to just dump it out as is, this is how I could do that. Okay? First thing I need to do is I want to match the root of the document. Okay? So that would be, this whole document is considered, there's a root portion, which is just basically slash. It's the root of the document. So you usually will say match on that. And then what we can do is say apply template. Okay? Usually not too much to do on that. That's fine. Next thing we can do is we can match on any element. Now, this is where we're using a wildcard. So we can say star and match on any element we like. So let's talk about that. Before, what we were doing is we were matching on elements like www.text, and then what we were doing, we were outputting that. Okay, this is dumping that out. What this allows us to do, though, is we can just replace that match with a star and say, hey, just emit anything you got. Okay? And one thing you'll notice is that this matched something and then it quit working. Well, there's a reason for that. What this did was it matched this document element, and by default, what XSLT do is it will try to recurse and process all the child elements. But we have a rule that doesn't say that. It says just stop. So for us to have it keep going, we can say process children. We're going to say, hey, can you please process current node. Process children. Okay? So now what we're doing is we're going to go ahead and keep trying to output this value entry and keep trying to output those as we go through the element hierarchy. Okay? All right, so let me ask this. Make sense? Okay. Carrie, anything specific you are fuzzy on? Got it. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do here is we're going to actually have this copy thing. So there's some actual default things built into XSLT to help you. If, let's say I wanted to just copy an XML input. I have two commands I can work with. One is copy. What that will do is copy the exterior of an element. Okay, and then I can apply templates within that. What that will do, this is not very pretty. Let's see if we can. clean this guy up. Okay. Here's basically what we did was we copied these elements, and sure enough, what we did was we copied the exterior of these elements, and then we processed all their children underneath them. And if we go and look at our original, that actually does follow the same form as the original. That's all great. The only problem is we're missing all our attributes. Well, there's an additional command that you can use. It's called copy of. And we can do things like we can say, hey, I would like to copy all my attributes, please. Okay? And now when we do this, this gives us some nice flexibility here about what it is that we're doing. Let's drop this in. Tidy, yes please. Okay, great. Now what we're doing is we're able to preserve all the original attributes from the source document and bring them over. Okay? Do you need both copy and copy of? Let's see. Copy and copy of are used in different contexts. So use copy to the shell of an element. Use copy of to duplicate something exactly. Okay? So let's actually try that real quick. In addition to doing a copy and a copy of, we're going to do div we'll do a copy of this of a transform, and you can certainly do this. Oh, something's complaining to me. Is it? Maybe not. Okay. If you take a look at this, what you're seeing is you're kind of seeing double here. We had the first deal where we were copying things recursively, but we're also saying, hey, just copy yourself. And so we get a lot of this double thing where we exactly copied the thing as many times as we wanted. So you can do all kinds of crazy stuff once you start using copy and copy of in different contexts. So, yeah. Right. Copy of is a big hammer. Okay. You can use copy of to copy an entire document tree if you want. Okay. All right. So back some of this out. Okay. Now there are a couple of other items that we can do here, just real quick, and usually they may be combined. You may see them combined. We may have a template match if you have just straight text. There's nothing to process underneath text. And you may also have processing instructions. You may have either a comment or a processing instruction. Okay? These are the types of things that you can match on an XML file. Okay, and you don't have to specify quite all of these, but if you do, that's perfectly fine. You can do what you like on there. Okay. Okay. So what you have here is, you can think of it as, if I give you an XML file and you run it through this transform, you're going to get pretty much the exact same XML file out on the other side. All right? Not very interesting, but it's a nice starting point. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a mode on here. And I will show you why. What I can do is I can have different transforms active in my style sheet, and I can switch between them. Okay? And this is kind of important. Ooh, not what I wanted. This is kind of important because it allows me to do all kinds of crazy things. And I can do things like select different things that I want to copy. So let's see. I'm going to select just my paragraphs to be copied. Okay? So if I go down here and look at my result, you'll see that now what's happening is I'm just copying the contents of the paragraph style. Okay? Because that's all I worked with. Oh. Whenever you do use moded templates, I just made a mistake, you do need to place the mode. Wow. The mode goes on basically the template, and then every time you call apply templates, it will also have to go onto that so that it knows how to recurse on the same thing. Okay? So now if we do this, I apologize, I'm having to jump through some of these hoops to show this to you, but let's see here. So now we're using that copy template, but we were able to say, look, just copy the paragraphs, don't copy anything else. All right? And we can put these different ways of processing into the file. So there's always a default. This is one that does not have a mode associated with it. And then we have the moded matches. So usually when you see match templates, you may see all of these stamped out together as a set so that people can do some processing. So I may come up here. In this case, I'm going to do a new one. It's going to be, we'll call it the HTML. Okay. Okay. And what we want to do on here is we can do something different. So for example, in my HTML, I'm going to say, you know what? For comments and processing instructions, do nothing. I don't really want those darn things. Okay. For text, yeah, go ahead. You know what? I don't even want text because what I'm processing doesn't have any text nodes, so don't do that either. Let's see. What do I want you to do? Well, let's try this. What I want you to do is, first off, I want you to output an HTML element. And then I want you to output a header section. Okay. And I want to go and put in a body. want you to go and apply templates. I want you to process all the child elements. Okay? Now, this is where Xsl Templating language gets its name. You see how these are a template, and I'm basically writing the markup I want emitted right here in this match template. Okay? And when this runs through, what will happen is this will get stamped out for everything. Now, what I can do here, I'm going to give a more specific role. By default, what we're going to do is just, we were going to process through an element, and we don't do anything with it. And if we look at this, this does, what am I doing wrong? Let's see here. Always good when you have something wrong. Okay, toward the end of what I wanted to cover today. Let me see if we can get ourselves back up and rolling here. Oh, there we go. Have an extra space there. That's always problematic. Okay, let's try that again. I've got this mistake throughout, don't I? Okay. All right, great. So what we're going to do is come up here and change what we're working on. We're going to have this process our document with our HTML match templates. Let's see what that gives us. Should give us pretty much as we expected. We get the HTML, we get the head, title, we get document, head, body. Okay, that's exactly what we asked it to do. All right. Now we want to have it do a little more. Now we don't want to process everything. But for certain things we know what we'd like to do. We want to say, look, if you look at our source document, document, content, paragraph. Well, let's try this. How about we convert all our paragraphs to div tags? We'll convert the style names to class names. And then we'll go in and we'll take all the text and just dump that out as text. Let's see if we can try that. So we're going to take these paragraphs. Let's do the first part. Let's convert these paragraphs to div tags and use the style name as a class name. So to do that, we want to create a new match. All right, and when we match on that, we want to dump out a div. We want to process the children. And while we're there, we want to emit an attribute. Now, there's a couple ways to do attributes. I'll show you a slick trick way to do it. I can say class equals. And then I can say, give me the style name. Okay, so let's make this a little clearer. Okay, get in that guy, and we want to pull the style name attribute off of him. Okay, let's take a look at what this is doing for us. All right, so let's take a look. We've got our structure of our HTML document coming out. We start in the body, and then we have two paragraphs, heading 1 and body, showing up. sure enough, we have 2 paragraphs here. Got heading 1 and body showing up. So that's pretty good. So I haven't checked here in a while. So I'm asking if people are understanding how we're getting divs from those paragraph elements. Okay, great. Okay. All right, let's finish off and let's do one more thing. So the paragraphs are great. Those are coming out. What we'd like to do now is have our text runs. We want the text to come out. So probably the easiest way to do this is just have, let's match on that text. Now the way XSLT works is that it will try to take the most specific match possible. So if it sees a wildcard like this, that's okay, it'll match on it. But if there's a better match, in this case for WW paragraph, it'll use that one instead. Okay? So that's constantly what you'll see in XSL. And there's ways to set priorities and all these other complexities. But generally what you want to know is it's going to find the most specific match. And your element will only match one time. Okay? You don't have to worry about it being processed 20 different ways. Now if you wanted to, there's some more work to do. But if you, by default, it will only process your element one time. So let's take a look at the text elements. The text elements have a value attribute. So basically, we just want to get the value of that value attribute and dump it out. All right, let's do that. So we're going to create a new match. Match is on www.text. Mode is going to HTML. Okay. And we are just going to do value of. We say, hey, can you please, let's be specific about what we're doing here. Dot refers to that text element. And we would like to take the value of the text element and get its value attribute. If you can do that for us, then what we should have is starting to see paragraph text coming out. Okay. Format this guy up a little better so we can go look at it. Okay, and there we go. We have the div tag, and we have the text of each one of these guys coming in. Okay, a couple of last items here to close out. One of the things you'll note is that on these apply templates, sometimes we're just calling apply templates, and other times we've called apply templates with the select statement. So the question is, well, what's the difference? Apply templates has an implicit select statement. And the implicit select statement is to process all child nodes. All right. So what I could have written here was instead of apply templates, I could actually write select node. And node refers to literally anything. It could be a text node. It could be a comment, a processing instruction, an element, an attribute, you name it. It could be anything you want. Okay. This is implied if you don't write it. Actually, more specifically, it refers to whatever the current element is. It says, give me all the children. Process all this element, or whatever I am, process all my children. Okay? Now, usually what you'll see is people will either leave this blank, or they might have something explicit where they say, I want to set a particular scope. So, for example, here we've said start at the root document and process from there. Why is this important? Well, it's kind of cool because we can do something cool here. I'm going to pull my title from the source document. I'm going to use the apply templates to do it. Now, right now, if I do this, I'm going to get the content twice. I'm going to select, I'm going to find, well, look anywhere in the document for a paragraph. I'm going to get the first document. And I'm going to use that as my title. Okay? So now, if I go down here and take a look, assuming I've done this correctly, you'll see now I'm pulling that document from there. Now, oh, I just realized I'm picking up that div, which I probably didn't want. But the neat part is I'm able to reuse those match templates. So what I'm going to do is just qualify it even better here. We'll just go back over here and let's change this and say, you know what? I really don't just want the first paragraph. I also want text nodes anywhere underneath them. Okay, and basically all I want you to do is dump out their value. Okay? And that way, if I do that, what I will end up with is, in fact, something that looks, if you look right here, I'm getting the title I expect with no extra divs or other wrappers on it. Okay? So select statements can be very powerful, and when you mix and match them with these match templates, you can set up different sets of templates for us to process and give us different ways to work through it. Okay? Okay. Now what I will do is we're going to wrap up here. We're over our time here. The thing that I said we were going to try and cover, which was pulling in content from another data source, we haven't done that yet. I do want to try and keep us, we've already gone over about 20 minutes, so I want to wrap up for today. What I can do, though, is put in as a possible future session to a continuation of this. Just a very brief review, and then starting out from this point, moving forward to where we could continue on and get on to those next parts where we're pulling in content, pulling in data from another data source, and then using it during our transformation to do some work. Okay. I'm open to continuing today. I know it's been a long time though, so I'm always going to give that option for us to just try pick it up another time. That's perfect, Gary. Okay. Now the good part is you do have access to this session. If you do change it, it may throw some things off, but if you want to cut paste these, you can always create your own session on the toys server and cut paste these over and start playing around with things. You can also, that should give you a leg up if you're going to start working with things over into ePublisher itself. Okay. You're welcome, Melissa. All right. Looks like we do need to make some improvements, though, so that we can get some data over there. Actually, I keep wanting to put this away. I'm going to do one more thing. I said I wasn't. I will show you briefly a way to get data into your document. The way I'm going to do this, there are various ways to do this. You can do this in ePublisher. Here's the standard XSL way to do it. I'm going to load a document, an XML document, into a variable here. And where it lives is on Toys, WebWorks, XML zip codes. Okay? You want to go and look at it? There's the zip codes file. And what you can do is just use a document statement on any URL, and XSLT will magically go and pull that in for you. And what you can do with that is you can say things like, we can actually do this. We'll say, we can do an XSL apply template, select on our zip codes document. We'll do a copy on it. Give a wrapper for this guy. Okay. And if we come down here, what you're going to see is that we don't just have our HTML files we're working with, we actually just pulled in that zip code data file. This is the key first step you have to have, and this is what you'll see in ePublisher a lot of times. You've got to get that data pulled in, and once you get it pulled in, you can now start doing XPath queries against it. So you can do things like, hey, I want to see the zip code for, what's the name of 78758? All right. So we can actually do that here and say, all right, for our zip code document, we want to see real quick. Look for anything whose code attribute equals 78758, and then we're going to dump its name attribute. There's some gnarly XPath stuff, but here's a great thing. It'll actually go and do this for us, and we should be able to see it. See right there, there's the original dump for the zip and zip code. And if you come over here, you can see I've totally got the expression wrong. Anyway, we'll go into this more next time, but this is a quick preview for you to see that, hey, it is possible to go and do these things. Oh, I need to have it search for anything down there. Now if we come down, there it is. 78758 comes out as North Austin. Okay? So this technique allows you to start combining data from multiple sources and is the key to actually making things happen in platforms like ePublisher or any other systems you're working with. All right. Okay. So again, resources, Toys Transform, make use of that. Mike and I believe Ms. Nadine perhaps may have also pointed out some other resources for XSLT or getting started. Go check those out. If you want some background on namespaces and XML, great there. And then there's, of course, that quick reference. It's a 2-page, 8.5 by 11-inch PDF. You print it out, front, back, and you've got basically most of what you need to know on XSL is sitting right there. And that, once you start playing around with that, you'll start to see some connections coming together. Okay, let's close out on our survey results. First of all, when to meet. So this is going to be time in January. It'll actually be January 31st is our next meeting time. Next meeting time will be at 2 p.m. Central. Voice, we're still looking at doing it on the phone. It's what everybody can do, or what most people can do. For topics to cover, we've got, as you can see, various things voted, but the big thing was invoking tools and post-processing output. So we'll show you how to do that. Good part is a lot of the stuff you're seeing today in the XSL, we'll be digging around in there to learn how to do some of those operations. And then there's suggestions for topics to cover. One is the order that the underlying ePublisher files are processed during data generation. What is happening to each? Okay, great question. And there's a checklist. Somebody was interested in a checklist for deploying Reverb to a web server. What are they supposed to tell their IT people? If you have that question, please do email me. I can get you set up with that. It's pretty straightforward. We're giving Reverb as static HTML files and static JavaScript files. If you can deploy that to your server, you should be good to go. If you are using if you're not using client-side search, if you're using IIS search or Google search, you may have a little more stuff involved. But again, you can contact our support group and they can give you assistance on that. All right. Oh yes, and just pointing out, if you're interested in the order processing, check out the Power Archive for October. It covers a number of processing orders, and it doesn't necessarily go into those details, but it may get you started on your path. Next topic suggested were classifying web styles from one output format to another. Really, that's what we do. That's the basis for ePublisher. That's what it does by default every time. If you use ePublisher and you have multiple targets on a project, then you can do this. I suggest you stop by Show Me to see that in action. But really, if you go and create multiple targets in ePublisher, you will be able to do that. So the last part is detailed scripting for AutoMap. Always a good subject. We'll keep that on the list. And then someone was asking about how does data go to XSLFO and PDF. Okay, we'd love to show you the details of how we do that and the different ways we do that with ePublisher. So we'll add that to the topic list and let you guys vote that up for us. Okay, lastly, webinar schedule. Again, Power Hour, 31st of January. It's invoking tools, post-processing outputs. Show Me is on December 20th. If you have a question about how to do some multiple outputs, go see that. This is really a high-level introduction. It's run by Director of Sales Christopher Ward. Stop by there if you have somebody who wants to learn about ePublisher or see what it does and get an understanding of what a normal user experience would be with ePublisher. Have them see that. They're not going to see XSLT. They're not going to see a lot of those things. What they're going to see is the ePublisher UI. They're going to see something very easy to use and click through all those other good fun things. Have them drop by there. Okay, and last one is Study Hall. So everyone in here who's got their XSLT questions and wants to dig more and learn more, drop by Study Hall. It's December 12th at 1 p.m. Central. Jesse Wiles runs those. There's a link down there at the bottom if you want to jump into those sessions and learn more. Thank you guys for coming today, and I really appreciate the feedback that you gave us in the survey and also during the session. Really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to doing round 2 of this same session. We'll go deeper, and we'll do some processing of other data sources and see where that gets us. Y'all have a great day.